Welcome back to True Transformation. I'm your host, Jason Atkinson, and I'm here to educate, encourage, and inspire you to make real and lasting change. I have a question from one of our subscribers. Daniel writes, I heard you on RX Muscle recently talking to Dave Palumbo about something called a cyclical ketogenic diet. Can you explain what that is? You mentioned carb refeeds or cheat meals, but I thought you couldn't eat carbs on keto. How does this work? Okay, great question, Daniel. I'm going to break this down into phases. We got some big words here. So, cyclical ketogenic diet. The first part of that, cyclical, is just a big word that means on a cycle. So, on a ketogenic diet is generally accepted as being a very low carbohydrate intake, usually around 25 grams or less per day. That's low enough to cause someone to switch from glucose to ketones for fuel. Ketones are an energy molecule that's produced in the absence of carbohydrate or in the absence of glucose or blood sugar. Your brain and body have to have a fuel source. So if glucose or carbohydrate intake is very, very low, the brain, after about 3 days, switches over to using ketones. At that point, you're in ketosis. So the first part of this is a cycle. So cyclical ketogenic diet is very similar to carb cycling with a few key differences. First of all, carb cycling is just high carb days and low carb days. That could be every other day. That could be a high carb day followed by a low carb day followed by another high carb day. That's not low enough carbohydrate level to get into ketosis. It takes about 3 days to get into ketosis. So, on a cyclical ketogenic diet, you're going to stay in the low carbohydrate phase for at least 3 days. Now, the way I do it and what I promote is 5 days low carbohydrate, followed by 2 days that are higher carbohydrate meals. It's not a high carb day, it's just a higher carbohydrate meal or two, usually in the evening within a set window. And if you want an exact schedule for that, go ahead and subscribe here. Click on my link tree. There is an option there that you can do a consultation, a 30-minute consultation with me absolutely free. And I'll go over any details that I leave out on today's video, help you design a diet and lifestyle that's going to work for you to meet your goals. So, ketogenic diet. Okay, so this is a very low carbohydrate diet. Now there's a few little changes here. The way I've constructed this is very similar to what the bodybuilders used to do in the 50s and 60s and 70s. They basically just ate really high protein. First of all, they had no knowledge really of calories or macros or any of this. That's all fairly new creation. They discovered that when their carbohydrates were lower, they were easily able to lose body fat when prepping for a contest. So bodybuilders in the off season or when there was not a show nearby, they would eat protein and carbohydrates, about half and half with a very low fat. Back in the 70s, that low fat diet was really in vogue. And then, like I said, coming close to a contest, they would reduce the carbohydrates to really burn through a lot of body fat. So here's something to know about ketogenic diet. Initially, very low carbohydrate diet improves insulin sensitivity. So if you're a type 2 diabetic, that's going to be especially helpful information for you when you're trying to get diabetes under control. Low carbohydrate diet will improve insulin sensitivity. So the underlying mechanism behind obesity in general and specifically type 2 diabetes, because they kind of go hand in hand. Okay, when you're young and healthy, your cells are able to use glucose for energy pretty regularly. Over time, because of this food environment that we're in with lots of processed foods, bear in mind throughout human history, even 100 years ago, people were not eating carbohydrates constantly. This is still a fairly new creation to have an industrial food production system that promotes lots of grains and processed sugars and high frequency of consumption of those things. So when you're young and healthy, your cells can use that glucose for energy. Over time, when you're constantly bombarding the cells with glucose, very frequently a high amount over a long period of time, eventually the cells will not accept the glucose. They become resistant. So insulin is a signaling hormone. Its job is to try to drive that glucose into storage, whether that's in liver glycogen, muscle glycogen, or even as fat. Insulin has a role in all of that. So the insulin is there to push the glucose into the cell. When the cell becomes resistant, the glucose stays in the bloodstream, begins to circulate, and eventually will get stored as fat if it's not getting processed. If it's not getting used as energy, or it's not getting stored in the muscle or the liver glycogen, eventually it's going to get stored as fat. So that's why I say insulin resistance and obesity kind of go hand in hand. And one of the ways you can tell that you're insulin resistant is you start to get a little round, spare tire around the midsection. That's a telltale sign there's an insulin resistance happening. Now, not everyone who is insulin resistant or diabetic becomes obese, and not everyone who is obese is insulin resistant to that degree or diabetic, but they are insulin resistant to some degree. So, keys to getting that under control: lowering the carbohydrate amount, lowering the frequency. Also, if you're just trying to burn stored body fat, if you're not diabetic, if you don't have metabolic disorder, you just want to burn more body fat, the lower your glycogen levels, the less stored carbohydrate you have in the muscle, the more effectively you will burn fat for fuel. When you eat carbohydrate, it competes with fat, dietary fat and body fat, as an energy source. So think of your body as being like a hybrid engine that can run on gasoline or battery power. Gasoline, or G for glucose, is like sugar in the fuel tank. When your tank is topped off, you're not going to switch over to stored body fat, or B for battery power. You're not going to switch over to stored fat or stored energy if there's plenty of energy available in the diet, in your body, okay? So the reason why we store the body fat in the first place is to have an energy source when there's no food around. So when you go through a period where you're eating lower carbohydrate, or lower calorie in general, you could say lower energy intake, and I'll get to that point in just a minute, but when you're eating less carbohydrates, less calories, less energy, you're going to switch over to burning body fat to make up the difference, most of it, hopefully, under the right conditions. Now, your body can also break down protein for energy, or break down muscle tissue for energy. Not dietary protein, but it can break down muscle tissue, and it will do so. If you stay in a prolonged calorie deficit, energy deficit, glucose deficit, however you want to say that, eventually your body catches on to the fact that there's no energy coming in, and it will dump some muscle to slow you down from expending so much energy, because muscle is expensive. The more muscle you have, the more energy you burn around the clock. So your body is trying to keep you alive. It doesn't really want to build a lot of muscle and burn a lot of body fat. Muscle is expensive. Burning body fat is dangerous because that's your backup. That's your emergency survival fuel in case you go through a period of starvation, and your body doesn't want to starve. It's trying to keep you alive. So it doesn't care whether you have six-pack abs or not. It's trying to keep you alive. So lower your glucose intake. That's going to cause you to switch over to more fat for fuel. Now, initially, lower glucose improves insulin sensitivity. However, at a point when you stay on a very low carbohydrate diet for a very long period of time, eventually the body catches on and it makes the muscles more insulin resistant. So it tries to divert all of that glucose to brain function. The brain is the most energy demanding organ in your body. So when there's not enough glucose to power your brain and body, your body kind of freaks out, especially if it's used to it, having glucose all the time. And it will stop the muscles from being able to use that glucose as energy. We don't want that. We want muscle cells to stay sensitive to the signal of insulin. We want to be able to use carbohydrate as energy when it's available. The key distinction here is just don't keep glucose or carbohydrate available all the time. Okay? You can limit your carbohydrates, like I'm suggesting, to 1 or 2 cheat meals on the weekends. You could do carbohydrate every day or every 2 or 3 days, although that's not technically a ketogenic diet, because I said it takes about 3 days to get into ketosis. So to me, that's the best of both worlds. Once you're in ketosis, you could care less about glucose. Hunger goes out the window. You got tons of energy because you got these ketones bodies to push you through the day, through all your activities. If you eat carbohydrate on the weekends, like I suggest, you got more than enough stored glycogen to get through, let's say, 5 or 6 hours of training every week. So even if you're doing strength training for 30 to 60 minutes, up to 5 times a week, you've got plenty of stored energy to get through those workouts. So don't fall for that idea that you have to carb up before a workout. When you come and do strength training, you're using the energy that you consumed yesterday or even the day before that. Now, here's another great thing. The way I kind of tweak keto a little bit is a little higher in protein, so about 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day, as opposed to a clinical ketogenic diet, which is very low carbohydrate, moderate protein, and super high in fat. If you're not going to eat carbohydrate, you have to eat something. So your choices are either fat or protein. So I'd say do a little bit of both, but have the number of grams of protein is going to be higher than the grams of fat. And keep in mind, those fat grams have twice as many calories. So even though it's double the amount of protein, the calories are going to be about the same. So with 200 grams of protein, let's say, and 100 grams of fat per day, you got 800 or 900 calories coming from each of those sources. But your body's not really going to use the protein for energy. And if you don't have carbohydrates for energy, you're going to burn dietary fat. Now, if you could dial that dietary fat down a little bit, once you've gotten really good at burning fat for fuel, you're going to burn more stored body fat. So the other great advantage to this cyclical ketogenic diet is it lets you have some of your favorite foods on the weekend. So, what I like to do is keep really low carbohydrate during the week. And then, like I said, Friday or Saturday, I will have some of my favorite indulgences like French fries or pizza or ice cream or cookies or candy or anything like that that's not on the menu the majority of the time. I think the all or nothing diet mindset is to a lot of people's detriment because it makes them feel that once they go on this diet, they can never go back to the way they were eating before. And if they do, it's a failure. So let's just go ahead and nip that in the bud. You will go off your eating plan. I don't recommend that anyone try to stay on a strict diet or in ketosis or anything like that longer than about 5 or 6 days in a row. That's the amount of time you need to lose about a pound or two of body fat every week. If you're doing the training right, if you're in a low enough energy deficit, you'll use about that amount of body fat. Up to about 1% of your current body weight per week is the maximum that you can safely and sustainably lose without detrimental effects. Then you have a carb refeed on the weekends. That all goes into storage in glycogen. That's the other great thing about it. You get to eat all your favorite foods, and you don't store it as body fat because your muscle glycogen is low, and you obviously need muscle glycogen for energy because you're working out 5 or 6 hours a week. So your body refills the tank. Now you're all topped off and you're ready to go, okay, for another week. And then you just go back into that cycle. I use Sunday as my reset day. That's my cue to go back into the low carb phase. And I'll stay there until Friday afternoon late or Friday evening. 1 or 2 carb meals on Friday. Right back on track for Saturday most of the day. 1 or 2 carb meals or junk food meals in the evening just to kind of refill the tank. And then we're good to go. So as I said at the beginning of the video, the bodybuilders knew what they were talking about. The golden era. High protein, low carb during the week, and then the weekend they had like what they called a junk day or a cheat day or a free day, however you want to say that. That actually stimulates your metabolism. Your body is always trying to keep you alive. When there's less energy coming in, your body senses that, and it's going to start down regulating some of these processes to slow you down. It's going to dump some muscle. It's going to make you feel lazy, so you're not wanting to burn up as much energy all the time. This resets a lot of those hormones. So leptin and ghrelin, for example, those are hormones that have a role in energy metabolism and appetite. Those are all kept in check with a cyclical ketogenic approach. I hope that explains it. I ran over a little bit on time, but I'll be back with more questions. So just keep them coming. If you have something you want me to express on the show here, just post that in the comments below, and I'll be back soon. Thank you.